This cat was rejected by everyone, until something unbelievable happened. The wind howled like a lament through the alleys of Fairbrook, cutting through his thin skin like tiny ice blades. He tried to curl up against the damp wall, but there was no more warmth, no more strength. His eyes were slowly closing. Was this how it would end? But then, he heard footsteps, and in just a few seconds, his life changed in a way no one could have imagined. The streets of Fairbrook were empty that night. The small, quiet town was filled with wooden houses, their porches decorated with pumpkins and autumn wreaths. The smell of burning firewood mingled with the aroma of baking pies, but none of this mattered to him. He was hungry, and he was cold. The little striped cat walked with difficulty, his thin body betraying days without eating. His amber eyes, once bright, were tired, hopeless. He no longer expected anything from anyone. Because he had tried, he had learned in the most painful way that some doors never open, that some hands that extend are not to welcome, but to push away. Martha Jenkins hung her laundry on the line behind her cottage, humming a melody her grandmother had taught her decades ago. The autumn air was crisp, perfect for drying sheets that would smell of sunshine even in the coming cold months. At 72, Martha still found joy in these simple tasks, in the rhythm of everyday life that had comforted her through the years of loneliness since her husband passed. Almost done, she muttered to herself, reaching for another clothespin. That's when she saw it. A flash of movement by the garden shed, a thin striped tail disappearing around the corner. Martha straightened her back, squinting through her bifocals. "Hello?" she called, but only silence answered. It had been that way at the truck depot, where a driver had thrown a bucket of cold water at him because he didn't want cats around. It had been that way at the corner cafe, where people smiled and chatted, but shooed him away as if he were a nuisance. It had been that way at the market, where an employee spread rat traps near the garbage to ensure he would never return. And now, as he wandered the streets illuminated by yellowish lampposts, he knew he was reaching his limit. But then a scent hit him. It was food, something warm, something that could fill his empty stomach. The door to the laundromat was ajar. He slipped inside, silent as the shadow he had become. On the counter, a plate of chicken was cooling. The smell was irresistible. His whole body begged for a single bite. He stretched out, pulled a piece with his paw, and the scream came before he could even chew. "Get out of here, you filthy animal!" The owner, an elderly woman, grabbed an apron and shook it in the air, trying to scare him away. The fright made him knock over a pile of clean clothes onto the floor. The noise was loud enough for neighbors to look out their windows. He fled into the street, his heart racing. But the story of the thief cat spread quickly. Now, if people had only ignored him before, now they wanted him to disappear for good. That night, the temperature plummeted. He knew he wouldn't survive the cold if he didn't find shelter. That's when he saw a dog sleeping inside the porch of a house. It was warm, curled up on a cushion, protected from the wind. The cat wished for that. He wanted that warmth. He approached slowly, stepping softly, trying to slip under the porch without anyone noticing. But then, the dog woke up. The strong bark broke the silence of the night. The homeowner came out furious, grabbed a bucket of water and threw it at him before he could escape. The water was as cold as ice. He ran and ran until he had nowhere else to go. Without a place to stay, he wandered to the back of a church and found a cardboard box. It was wet, old, but it was all he had. He curled up, closed his eyes, and waited. Waited for the cold to do what the entire town had already done, finish him off. But then, he heard footsteps. The rain began to fall as night deepened. A gentle patter at first that soon became a steady downpour. In the cardboard box behind St. Mary's Church, the little cat shivered uncontrollably, his damp fur providing little protection against the autumn chill. His once bright amber eyes grew dimmer as exhaustion pulled at him, urging him to give in, to let go. He thought of warmth then, a distant memory from kittenhood, the press of his mother's fur, the comfort of his siblings nestled around him. It had been so long ago before the car had stopped and the box had been abandoned by the roadside, before his siblings had been taken one by kind hands, while he, the smallest, the most timid, had been left behind. His eyes began to close. Perhaps sleep would be merciful. Perhaps he wouldn't wake to feel the cold anymore. The last thing he registered before consciousness slipped away was the sound of footsteps, soft and careful, approaching through the rain. The footsteps were soft, careful. A shadow covered the weak morning light. "Oh, my God." The voice was different. There was no anger, no impatience. It was warm, full of tenderness. The woman kneeling before him had grey hair pinned in a loose bun and a wool scarf wrapped around her neck. But it was her eyes that made him hesitate. They were gentle. She didn't try to grab him, didn't try to push him away. She just whispered, "You're cold, aren't you?" He wanted to run away, but he couldn't. He just stayed there, trembling, not knowing what to expect. Then she did something no one had ever done before. She took the scarf from her neck and, with an incredibly delicate gesture, wrapped it around his body. The warmth of that wool was nothing compared to the warmth of the gesture. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're not alone." Her name was Rowena, and in that instant everything changed. Rowena Mitchell had lived in Fairbrook all her 68 years. The widow of the town's former doctor, she was known for her kind heart and the small paintings she sold at the community market every Saturday. That morning, she had been on her way to early services when the rain began. Taking shelter under the church's awning, she had heard a faint sound, barely audible above the drumming of the rain, that drew her around to the back of the building. What she found broke her heart. A small, bedraggled cat, more bone than flesh, curled in a sodden cardboard box. He wasn't moving. "Oh, my God," she whispered, kneeling beside the box, despite the mud soaking through her church dress. The cat's eyes, a beautiful amber color, flickered open at her voice, filled with fear and resignation. "You're cold, aren't you?" she said softly, unwinding the hand-knitted scarf from around her neck. With gentle movements, she draped it over the trembling animal. "It's okay, you're not alone." The cat watched her with disbelief, as if kindness was a foreign language he had never heard spoken. "I'm Rowena," she continued, her voice steady and calm, "and I think you need a friend." Rowena stayed there, kneeling in the mud, speaking in soft tones to the frightened creature. She didn't reach out to touch him, didn't try to pick him up. She simply opened her heart, offering what the little cat needed most: patience, gentleness, and time. After what seemed like hours but was perhaps only 20 minutes, she opened her handbag and took out a small container. "I was saving this for lunch," she said, opening the lid to reveal some leftover roast chicken. "But I think you need it more than I do." She placed a small piece on the edge of the box, then backed away slightly, giving the cat space. His nose twitched at the scent, but he didn't move. "It's for you," she encouraged. "No tricks." Finally, trembling with effort, the cat stretched forward and took the morsel. Rowena smiled as he ate it quickly, hunger overcoming caution. "Son, there's more where that came from," she said, placing another piece a little closer to herself. "At my house. It's warm there, and dry." Piece by piece, Rowena created a trail of chicken morsels leading out of the box, each one bringing the cat a little closer to her. She never grabbed for him, never rushed. By the time he had taken the last piece, he was standing at her feet, still wary, but no longer terrified. "Would you like to come home with me?" she asked. "I promise you'll be safe." The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. Rowena stood slowly, careful not to startle her new friend, and took a step toward the street. Then another. She looked back, hoping but not demanding, and the cat, after a moment's hesitation, followed. Rowena took him home, but she didn't pick him up right away. She waited for him to decide to follow her. She fed him, but not just with food, but with affection. On the first night, he didn't sleep in the bed, not on the sofa either. He just curled up in a corner, suspicious. But the next morning, when Rowena woke up, he was there, lying next to her, on her blanket. Her heart warmed. She smiled, gently ran her hand over his head and murmured, "I think you need a name. How about ash, like autumn leaves, and like something that rises again?" And at that moment, he knew. He was no longer a nameless cat. He was no longer rejected. He had a home, and he had love. For the first time in a long time, he was happy. Rowena's cottage sat on the edge of town, surrounded by maple trees that blazed with autumn color. It was small but cozy, filled with quilts she had made herself, watercolor paintings of local landscapes, and the comforting scents of herbal tea and lavender sachets. To a cat who had known only the harshness of the streets, it was paradise. That first day, she moved slowly around him, giving him space to explore. She set up a small bed in the corner of the living room, lined with a soft flannel blanket, but she didn't expect him to use it. Trust would take time, she knew. "There's no rush, Ash," she told him, placing a bowl of water and another of food nearby. "This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." Ash watched her from beneath the sofa, still uncertain that this miracle wasn't some cruel trick. But as evening fell, and Rowena settled into her rocking chair with her knitting, the rhythmic click of the needles and the warmth of the fireplace gradually lulled him into a sense of security he hadn't felt in months, perhaps years. When Rowena yawned and prepared for bed, she smiled to see that Ash had emerged from his hiding place and was curled on the rug near the fire. "Good night, sweet boy," she said softly. "I'll see you in the morning." She left the door to her bedroom ajar, an invitation but not a demand. And though Ash spent most of that night alert to every creak and rustle of the unfamiliar house, by the early hours of morning, exhaustion overcame his wariness. Rowena woke to find a warm weight pressed against her side. Ash had climbed onto the bed and curled up on the edge of her quilt, his amber eyes watching her with cautious hope. "Well, good morning to you," she said, her voice thick with sleep and emotion. "I'm glad you decided to join me." She reached out slowly, giving him time to retreat if he wished, and gently stroked the top of his head. To her delight, a rusty purr rose from his throat, perhaps the first in a very long time. "I think you need a name," she said thoughtfully. "Something that honors what you've been through, but also what you could become." She looked out the window at the golden leaves drifting from the maple tree. "How about Ash? Like the autumn leaves, and like something that rises again from what seems like an ending." Ash leaned into her touch, the purr growing stronger, and Rowena felt tears prick her eyes. She had been alone too long, she realized. Ever since Harold had passed 5 years ago, she had moved through her days with purpose but without true companionship. Now, looking into Ash's amber eyes, she saw a reflection of her own loneliness and the possibility of its end. "Well, Ash," she said, wiping away a tear, "I think we might be exactly what each other needs." That day marked the beginning of a new rhythm to Rowena's life. She took Ash to the veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Chen, who gently examined him while explaining everything she was doing. "He's malnourished and has a few minor infections, but nothing we can't treat," she assured Rowena. "With good care, he'll be a healthy cat in no time. Though," she hesitated, looking at his scarred ear and the slight limp in his back leg, "these old injuries suggest he's had a hard life." "Well, that's behind him now," Rowena said firmly, stroking Ash's head as Dr. Chen administered vaccines and antibiotics. As autumn deepened toward winter, Ash began to thrive. His coat, once dull and matted, grew glossy with health. The hollows in his sides filled out as his appetite improved. But the greatest transformation was in his spirit. Day by day, his confidence grew, his personality emerged, and his trust in Rowena deepened. He began to follow her from room to room, helping in his feline way as she went about her chores, supervising the laundry folding from the top of the clean pile, inspecting her garden work from the windowsill, offering serious critique of her painting by occasionally batting at her brush. In the evenings, he claimed a spot on her lap while she knitted or read, his purr a contented accompaniment to the crackling fire. And at night, he slept curled against her side, a guardian against the loneliness that had been her constant companion since Harold's passing. "You know," she told him one evening as snow began to fall outside the cottage windows, "I think you've saved me as much as I've saved you." Ash blinked slowly at her, the cat's way of showing love, and Rowena felt her heart swell with gratitude for this unexpected gift, this second chance at companionship that had come to her in the form of a homeless cat on a rainy autumn morning. As winter settled over Fairbrook, transforming the town into a postcard-perfect scene of snow-covered cottages and twinkling lights, news of Rowena's rescue of the thief cat spread through the community. Not everyone was pleased. "That cat was a menace," declared Gladys Turner, the owner of the laundromat where Ash had once tried to steal a piece of chicken. "Knocked over a whole pile of Mrs. Henderson's freshly pressed sheets, he did. Filthy creature. Rowena's always been soft-hearted," agreed Walter Simmons, who ran the grocery store. Remember how she used to bring Harold's leftover medicine samples to folks who couldn't afford their prescriptions? Same thing, different day. But others were more reflective. Never did like how people treated that poor animal, admitted Elsie Baker, the town librarian, as she stamped books at the circulation desk. Seems to me we've all been a bit quick to judge. These conversations reached Rowena's ears when she ventured into town for groceries or to sell her paintings at the weekend market. Some neighbors were openly disapproving, giving her a wide berth as if her compassion for Ash might be contagious. Others simply watched with curiosity, wondering how long her patience would last with a cat known for causing trouble. Rowena paid them little mind. Her focus was on Ash's recovery and on preparing for Christmas, her first with companionship since Harold's passing. She hung a wreath on the door, strung lights around the windows, and set up the small artificial tree that had spent the last few years gathering dust in the attic. "So it's not much," she told Ash as she unpacked ornaments from their tissue paper wrappings, "but it makes the house cheerful." Ash, who had initially regarded the tree with suspicion, now lounged beside it, occasionally batting at a low-hanging glass ball that reflected the firelight in mesmerizing patterns. One afternoon, as snow fell in thick, lazy flakes outside the cottage windows, a knock at the door startled both Rowena and Ash. The cat immediately retreated under the sofa, his old wariness returning. "It's all right," Rowena assured him, though her own heart had jumped at the unexpected visitor. Few people came to call these days. She opened the door to find Martha Jenkins, her next-door neighbor, standing on the porch with a covered dish in her gloved hands. "Thought you might like some gingerbread," Martha said without preamble. "Made too much as usual." Rowena blinked in surprise. Martha had hardly spoken 2 words to her since Harold's funeral, when she had criticized Rowena's decision to have him cremated rather than buried in the town cemetery. "That's very kind of you, Martha. Would you like to come in for tea?" Martha hesitated, stamping snow from her boots. "Well, just for a minute. It's bitter cold out here." As Martha settled at the kitchen table, her gaze darted around the cottage, taking in the Christmas decorations, the newly arranged furniture that accommodated Ash's bed and toys, and finally, the cat himself, who had cautiously emerged from under the sofa and was watching from the doorway. "So that's him then," Martha said, nodding toward Ash. "The cat everyone's been talking about." Rowena set mugs of tea on the table and took a seat. "That's Ash, yes." Martha studied the cat with a critical eye. "Doesn't look like much of a troublemaker to me." "He's not," Rowena said firmly. "He was hungry and scared. Anyone would do desperate things in that situation." Martha took a sip of her tea, then set the mug down with a decisive click. "Well, that's what I've been saying. Gladys Turner's been going on about how you've taken in a menace to society, but I told her, that cat didn't have a mean bone in his body, just an empty stomach. Told her she'd have done the same if she'd been born astray." Rowena nearly choked on her tea. "You defended Ash?" "Course I did," Martha said, looking affronted. "Can't abide cruelty, human or otherwise." She leaned forward, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "Truth is, I've been putting out a bowl for the strays behind my garden shed for years. Never had the courage to bring one inside, though." She glanced at Ash again. "How's he settling in?" Thus began an unexpected friendship between Rowena and Martha, bound together by their shared concern for Fairbrook's forgotten creatures. Martha became a regular visitor to the cottage, often bringing treats for both Rowena and Ash. She even took to cat-sitting when Rowena needed to travel to the next town for art supplies or medical appointments. Other attitudes in town changed more slowly. Gladys Turner continued to sniff disapprovingly whenever Rowena entered the laundromat. Walter Simmons still watched carefully when she browsed his grocery store, as if expecting Ash to leap from her bag and cause chaos. But gradually, as winter deepened and the story of the rescue spread, more of Fairbrook's residents began to soften. Elsie Baker from the library dropped by with a cat care book. Young Tommy Wilson, who delivered the town's weekly newspaper, started bringing extra scraps from his mother's butcher shop for the famous cat. And Dr. Sarah Chen, who had treated Ash's initial ailments, became a vocal advocate for the adoption of other strays who occasionally appeared around town. "If Rowena Mitchell can rehabilitate the infamous thief cat," she would tell her patients, "imagine what a loving home could do for any animal in need." For Ash, these changes in town sentiment meant little. His world had narrowed to the warmth of Rowena's cottage, the comfort of regular meals, and the joy of companionship. But for Rowena, who had lived on the periphery of Fairbrook's social life since Harold's death, the gradual thawing of relationships was like a spring awakening in the midst of winter. "You know, Ash," she told him one evening as they sat by the fire, listening to carols on the old record player, "you might have done more than find yourself a home. I think you might have helped me find my place in this town again." Ash, curled in her lap, simply purred his agreement. Sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. January brought the coldest days anyone in Fairbrook could remember. The town huddled beneath a blanket of snow, pipes froze, and the elderly residents, Rowena among them, struggled to keep their homes warm enough as the wind found every crack and crevice in the old buildings. In Rowena's cottage, the ancient heating system groaned and protested against the bitter cold. She piled extra quilts on the bed at night, and Ash, now fully comfortable in his role as companion, pressed against her side, sharing his warmth. "We'll get through this together," she assured him, stroking his fur as they listened to the wind howl outside. Spring will come eventually. But as January turned to February with no break in the cold, Rowena began to worry. Her arthritis, normally manageable, flared painfully in the damp chill. The simple task of carrying firewood from the shed became an ordeal that left her gasping and trembling. One particularly bitter morning, as she struggled to light the stove with fingers stiff from cold, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The room tilted alarmingly, and she clutched at the counter to steady herself. "Just need to sit down for a moment," she murmured to Ash, who was watching her with concern from his perch on the kitchen chair. She lowered herself carefully, breathing deeply until the spell passed, but it happened again the next day and the next. And on the fourth day, as she bent to fill Ash's food bowl, the dizziness was accompanied by a sharp, stabbing pain in her chest that radiated down her left arm. Rowena sank to the floor, the bag of cat food spilling across the linoleum. "Oh," she gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. "Now this isn't good." Ash circled her anxiously, nudging her hand with his head, meowing with increasing distress as she failed to respond to his concern. When she tried to reach for the telephone on the wall, another wave of pain stopped her, leaving her curled on the cold floor, fighting for breath. "Help," she whispered, though there was no one to hear. "Please, someone help." Ash paced the kitchen, his tail lashing with agitation. Then, with sudden decision, he darted to the front door and began to scratch frantically, meowing at a volume Rowena had never heard from him before. But the door remained closed, the cottage isolated at the end of the lane, and the nearest neighbor, Martha Jenkins, was likely inside her own home with the windows shut tight against the cold. As consciousness began to fade, Rowena's last thought was of Ash. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't want to leave you alone again." The cat returned to her side, pressing against her, his amber eyes wide with what seemed like understanding. Then, with another piercing meow, he leapt onto the counter and, in a deliberate motion so unlike his usually careful behavior, knocked the telephone from its cradle. The crash startled Rowena back to awareness. She watched, dazed, as Ash pawed at the fallen receiver, then looked at her expectantly. "Clever boy," she managed, dragging herself toward the phone. With trembling fingers, she pressed the 3 numbers that might save her life. When the emergency dispatcher answered, Rowena could manage only a whisper. "Help, Heart, 42, Maple Lane." Then darkness claimed her. The sound of sirens penetrated the fog first, followed by loud knocking and voices calling her name. Rowena opened her eyes to find paramedics kneeling beside her, taking her vitals, asking questions she couldn't quite focus enough to answer. "Ma'am, you're having a heart attack," one of them said, his young face serious above his uniform. "We're going to take you to the hospital now." As they prepared to move her onto a stretcher, Rowena's thoughts cleared enough for her to reach out, grasping the paramedic's sleeve. "My cat," she said urgently. "Say please, someone needs to take care of Ash." The paramedic glanced around, spotting Ash, who was watching the proceedings from beneath the kitchen table. "We'll make sure someone checks on him. Do you have a neighbor or friend we can call?" "Martha Jenkins next door," Rowena managed. Now she has a key. As they wheeled her out to the ambulance, snow swirling around the stretcher, Rowena caught a glimpse of Martha hurrying down the lane in her bathrobe and boots, summoned by the commotion. "I'll take care of him," Martha called, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "You just get better." Then the ambulance doors closed, and Rowena was whisked away to the regional hospital 20 miles away, leaving Ash alone in the cottage that had become their sanctuary. For 3 days, Ash paced the empty rooms, waiting by the door, sleeping in Rowena's bed where her scent still lingered on the pillows. Martha came twice daily, refilling his food and water, sitting with him for an hour or so, talking to him as if he could understand every word. "They're taking good care of her," she assured him, scratching behind his ears the way Rowena did. "Dr. Chen, you remember her? The nice vet lady? Her husband is a cardiologist at the hospital. He's personally looking after Rowena. Says she's stable, whatever that means." Ash listened, his amber eyes fixed on Martha's face, absorbing the cadence of her voice, if not the meaning of her words. On the 4th day, Martha arrived with a cat carrier. "Time for a little adventure, Ash," she said, setting it on the floor. "Rowena's asking for you. Seems she won't rest properly until she sees you're okay." Getting Ash into the carrier proved challenging. He had no fond memories of his last trip to the vet, but Martha was patient, using treats and gentle coaxing until he finally stepped inside. The drive to the hospital was tense, with Ash meowing plaintively from the back seat of Martha's old station wagon. The hospital itself was overwhelming. Bright lights, strange smells, and the constant bustle of staff and visitors. But Martha had come prepared. She draped a light blanket over the carrier as she navigated the corridors, speaking to Ash in a soothing murmur. "Technically, you're not supposed to be here," she confided as they waited for the elevator. "But Sarah, Dr. Chen, you know, she arranged it all, special permission. Says animal companionship is therapeutic," she chuckled. "Fancy words for saying Rowena needs her cat." When they finally reached Rowena's room in the cardiac care unit, Martha paused in the doorway, suddenly unsure. Rowena looked small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, attached to monitors and an IV drip, her silver hair spread across the pillow without its usual neat bun. But at the sight of the carrier, her face lit up with a smile that transformed her. "You brought him," she said, voice weak but filled with joy. "Oh, Martha, thank you." Martha set the carrier on the bedside chair and opened the door. For a moment, Ash hesitated, overwhelmed by the strange environment. Then he saw Rowena, and with a soft meow of recognition, leapt from the carrier onto the bed. With exquisite care, as if sensing her fragility, he settled against her side, his purr rumbling loudly in the quiet room. "There's my boy," Rowena whispered, tears flowing freely as she stroked his fur. "I've missed you so much." Martha wiped away tears of her own as she watched them reunite. "Well," she said gruffly, "guess that settles it. Cat's got healing powers, that's what." Dr. Chen's husband, passing by on his rounds, paused in the doorway to witness the scene. "I'd have to agree," he said with a smile. "Best medicine we could prescribe." That brief visit marked a turning point in Rowena's recovery. Though Ash had to return to the cottage with Martha, hospital rules allowing only the one special visit, knowing he was safely cared for gave Rowena the peace of mind to focus on healing. And perhaps it was coincidence, but from that day forward, her vital signs improved steadily. Her strength returned more quickly than expected, and the shadow of fear that had darkened her eyes began to lift. 2 weeks later, under strict orders to take it easy and with a regimen of new medications, Rowena returned home to the cottage, and to Ash, who greeted her with a joy that matched her own, weaving around her legs, purring so loudly it seemed his small body could barely contain the sound. As she settled back into her favorite chair by the fire, Ash immediately claiming his spot on her lap, Rowena felt a sense of profound gratitude wash over her. "You saved my life," she told him, scratching under his chin. "First by giving me a reason to get up each morning, and then quite literally by helping me call for help." She smiled, remembering the fallen telephone. Who would have thought the little thief cat everyone wanted gone would turn out to be a hero? Ash simply purred his response, his amber eyes half closed in contentment. He didn't need accolades or recognition. He had everything he wanted right here: warmth, food, and most importantly, the person who had shown him that not all humans were to be feared, that some hands reached out to heal rather than harm. As winter slowly loosened its grip on Fairbrook, giving way to the first tentative signs of spring, Rowena and Ash settled into a new routine shaped by her recovery needs. And if the cottage was visited more frequently now by neighbors bringing casseroles, offering to help with chores, or simply stopping by to chat. Well, that was just one more unexpected blessing that had come into their lives since that rainy autumn day, when two lonely souls had found each other behind St. Mary's Church. March arrived with surprising gentleness, bringing rain instead of snow and the first tiny green shoots poking through the soil in Rowena's garden. As her strength returned, she began to venture outside more, sitting on the porch with Ash beside her, watching the world awaken from its winter sleep. "Everything gets a second chance," she told him, as they observed a robin building a nest in the maple tree. "The earth, the trees, the flowers, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, people too." Ash, who had developed a fascination with birdwatching, though always from a respectful distance, never attempting to chase or catch them, chirped in agreement. Rowena's heart attack had changed more than just her daily routine and medication schedule. It had transformed her relationship with the town of Fairbrook. Neighbors who had once merely nodded in passing now stopped to chat, asking after her health and admiring Ash, who had become something of a local celebrity. Even Gladys Turner from the laundromat had mellowed, bringing over a homemade casserole and admitting with obvious reluctance that perhaps she had been a bit harsh one about the chicken incident. "He was just hungry, I suppose," she said, watching as Ash groomed himself on the windowsill. "And he does seem quite civilized now." Rowena accepted the olive branch with grace. "He just needed someone to believe in him," she said simply. As April unfurled its blossoms across Fairbrook, Rowena felt well enough to resume her Saturday tradition of selling paintings at the community market. Ash, now confident enough to venture beyond the cottage, accompanied her, riding regally in a special basket attached to the front of her bicycle. Their arrival at the market caused quite a stir. Children gathered to pet the now sleek cat, offering treats that their parents had purchased specifically for Rowena's famous Ash. Elderly neighbors who had known Rowena all her life marveled at the change in her. The new sparkle in her eyes, the ready laugh, the way she seemed more present, more engaged with the world around her. "That cat's been good for you," observed Bill Thompson, who ran the hardware store. "I've never seen you looking so alive, not even when Harold was still with us." He paused, then added thoughtfully, "Maybe because you needed someone to take care of again, or someone to take care of you." Rowena considered his words as she arranged her watercolor paintings on the display easel. "Perhaps it's both," she said finally. "Ash and I take care of each other." The day was a success beyond Rowena's expectations. She sold 3 paintings, more than she'd ever managed before, and received 2 commissions for pet portraits, a new direction for her art that excited her creative spirit. But the most significant moment came near the end of the market day, when a tall man with salt and pepper hair approached her stall. He was a stranger to Rowena, his city clothes marking him as an outsider in the small town. "These are remarkable," he said, studying her paintings with a professional eye. "You have a unique perspective." "Thank you," Rowena replied, pleased but slightly flustered by the intensity of his gaze. The man crouched to Ash's level, offering his hand for inspection. The cat, usually wary of strangers, sniffed cautiously, then allowed a brief scratch under the chin. "And who might this be?" the man asked. "This is Ash," Rowena said, pride evident in her voice. "He's something of a local celebrity." "Is he now?" The man smiled, standing up. "I'd like to hear that story." He extended his hand. "I'm Thomas Harrington, by the way. I own a small gallery in Burlington." Rowena's heart skipped a beat. A gallery owner? Here, looking at her modest watercolors? "Rowena Mitchell," she responded, taking his hand. "And there's quite a story to tell about Ash if you have the time." As the market closed around them, Rowena found herself walking with Thomas to the town's only cafe, Ash contentedly riding in his basket. Over cups of tea, she told him everything, finding Ash behind the church, nursing him back to health, his heroism during her heart attack, and how he had inadvertently helped her reconnect with her community. Thomas listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, his eyes occasionally moving from Rowena to Ash and back again with growing interest. "You know," he said when she finished, "I came to Fairbrook looking for local artists to feature in a special exhibition at my gallery. New beginnings is the theme." He smiled. "I think I've found exactly what I was looking for." Rowena stared at him, not quite comprehending. "My paintings, in Burlington." Not just your paintings, Thomas clarified. Your story, your and Ash's story. The paintings, yes, but also photographs of Ash, of your town, perhaps even written narratives to accompany the visual art. His enthusiasm grew as he spoke. It's the perfect embodiment of the exhibition's theme: second chances, new beginnings, the transformative power of compassion. Rowena felt light-headed, and not from her heart condition. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Thomas urged. The exhibition opens in early June. That gives us about 7 weeks to prepare. As they parted outside the cafe, Thomas handed her his business card. Call me when you decide, he said, but I hope you'll say yes. Stories like yours and Ash's, they need to be shared. Riding home in the golden light of late afternoon, Ash secure in his basket, Rowena turned the unexpected opportunity over in her mind. An exhibition in a real gallery. It seemed impossible, yet Thomas had been so sincere, so enthusiastic. What do you think, Ash? She asked, glancing down at her feline companion. Are we ready for an adventure beyond Fairbrook? Ash merely blinked his amber eyes at her, but Rowena thought she detected a glimmer of excitement there, or perhaps it was simply a reflection of her own. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the cottage windows and birdsong filled the air, Rowena sat at her small writing desk, Thomas Harrington's business card propped against her tea mug. Ash lounged nearby, stretched across a patch of sunshine on the windowsill. It would mean more painting, she told him, tapping her fingers nervously on the desk. More work than I've done in years, and going to Burlington, that's a big city compared to Fairbrook, she sighed. I haven't been further than the county hospital in over 5 years. Ash yawned widely, showing his pink tongue, then settled back into his sunbath with seeming indifference. But Rowena wasn't fooled. She had learned to read his subtle expressions, the minute shifts in his posture that revealed his mood. You think I should do it, don't you? She said, smiling despite her anxiety. You're not afraid of new adventures anymore. After another hour of deliberation, she finally reached for the telephone. The conversation with Thomas was brief but decisive. Yes, she would participate in the exhibition. Yes, she understood the deadline. Yes, she was excited about the opportunity. When she hung up, her heart was racing, not from fear or illness, but from a thrill she hadn't experienced in decades. Purpose, challenge, the chance to share her art and Ash's story with a world beyond Fairbrook. Well, she said to Ash, who had moved from the windowsill to investigate her suddenly elevated mood, I guess we're going to be busy for the next few weeks. The days that followed took on a new rhythm. Mornings were for painting, landscapes of Fairbrook bathed in spring light, portraits of Ash in various poses around the cottage, scenes from their shared story reimagined through her artistic lens. Afternoons were often spent with Martha, who had enthusiastically volunteered to help prepare for the exhibition. Never thought I'd see the day, Martha commented as she helped Rowena sort through potential pieces for the show. I'm our little town's artist making it to the big city. She held up a watercolor of Ash, sleeping on Rowena's rocking chair, the firelight casting a golden glow over his striped fur. This one's special, captures him perfectly. Rowena nodded, adding it to the definite pile. I want to show how he transformed, from the scared, starving cat behind the church to, well, to who he is now. It's not just his transformation that's worth showing, Martha observed quietly. Look at you, Rowena. 6 months ago you were just getting by, barely leaving the house except for necessities. Now you're creating beautiful art every day, planning a gallery exhibition. She smiled. That cat changed your life as much as you changed his. Rowena considered this as she worked on a new piece later that evening, a painting of St. Mary's Church in the rain, with a small, bedraggled figure taking shelter in a cardboard box behind it. The beginning of their story. She's right, you know, she murmured to Ash, who was supervising her work from his perch on the nearby bookshelf. Before you came along, I was just existing, not really living, going through the motions. Ash blinked slowly, that special cat communication that many interpreted as I love you. Yes, I love you too, Rowena replied, adding a touch more shadow to the painting. And soon the whole world, or at least Burlington, will know our story. As May blossomed into June, the anticipation in Rowena's cottage grew. Thomas visited twice, selecting pieces for the exhibition and taking photographs of Ash for the promotional materials. The second time he brought a journalist from the Burlington Chronicle who interviewed Rowena for a feature article about the upcoming show. "It's a remarkable story of mutual rescue," the journalist observed, as she watched Ash weave around Rowena's ankles, purring loudly. A testament to the healing power of compassion and second chances. Finally, the day of the exhibition's opening arrived. Martha drove Rowena to Burlington, with Ash traveling in his carrier on the back seat. He had become an experienced traveler by now, accompanying Rowena on several preliminary visits to the gallery, but the journey still made him anxious. "It'll be worth it," Rowena assured him as they navigated the busy streets of the city. "Tonight is our night to shine." Thomas Harrington's gallery was a converted warehouse in the arts district, its brick walls and high windows creating a space that was both intimate and impressive. When they arrived, Thomas himself came out to greet them, looking elegant in a dark suit. "The guest of honor and her inspiration," he said warmly, peering into Ash's carrier. "Everything's ready. We're expecting quite a crowd, based on the response to the newspaper article." Rowena's stomach fluttered with a mixture of excitement and nerves. "I've never done anything like this before," she admitted. Thomas patted her hand reassuringly. "Just be yourself. Share your story. The art will speak for itself." And speak it did. As evening fell and the gallery filled with people, Rowena watched in amazement as strangers moved from painting to painting, reading the accompanying narratives she had written, their expressions shifting from curiosity to understanding, to often visible emotion. One elderly woman stood for a long time before the painting of Ash curled in the wet cardboard box. When she finally turned away, there were tears in her eyes. "Your work is beautiful," she told Rowena, who was standing nearby with Ash in his special exhibition harness. "But it's the story behind it that truly touches the heart." She glanced down at Ash, now sleek and confident at Rowena's side. "May I?" At Rowena's nod, the woman gently stroked Ash's head. "I lost my cat last year," she confided. 17 years we were together. I've been afraid to open my heart again." She straightened, a new resolve in her eyes. "But your story has given me courage. The shelter near my home has many cats waiting for someone to love them." Throughout the evening, similar conversations unfolded. A young couple shared how they had rescued a dog from a highway median. A middle-aged man described the parrot that had helped him through depression. A teenage girl shyly admitted that she volunteered at the local animal shelter every weekend. Ash, usually wary of crowds, seemed to sense the importance of the occasion. He remained calm beside Rowena, occasionally accepting gentle pets from admirers, his amber eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with dignified interest. Near the end of the evening, Thomas approached with a distinguished-looking woman in tow. "Rowena, I'd like you to meet Eleanor Graham. She's the curator for the State Art Museum's annual Vermont Voices exhibition." Rowena shook the woman's hand, feeling slightly dazed. The State Museum was a prestigious venue, far beyond anything she had ever aspired to. "Your work has great emotional resonance," Eleanor said without preamble, "and your technique is impressive for someone without formal training." She glanced down at Ash, who was sitting regally at Rowena's feet. "I'd like to discuss the possibility of including some of your pieces in our autumn exhibition." As Eleanor and Thomas moved away to discuss details, Rowena found herself momentarily overwhelmed. She excused herself and stepped outside the gallery's rear door into a small garden area where the evening air was cool and refreshing. Ash followed, seemingly equally glad for the brief respite. "Can you believe it?" she asked him, her voice trembling with emotion. "The State Museum. All because of you, my darling boy." Ash rubbed against her legs, purring loudly in the quiet garden. Above them, stars punctuated the velvet darkness, as bright and full of possibility as Rowena's future now seemed. A soft cough interrupted their moment of reflection. Martha stood in the doorway, her usually stoic expression softened by pride. "Thought I'd find you two out here," she said, joining them in the garden. "Son needed a breather from your adoring public." Rowena laughed, wiping away a tear. "It's all a bit much to take in." Martha nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "Who'd have thought," she said, gazing down at Ash, "that the cat everyone wanted gone would end up bringing so much good into the world?" Rowena crouched to stroke Ash's sleek fur, remembering the terrified, skeletal creature she had found behind St. Mary's Church just months ago. "Every living being deserves a chance to become what they're meant to be," she said softly. "Sometimes all it takes is one person who sees the possibility. As they stood together in the starlit garden, Rowena felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the threads of her life had finally woven together into a pattern of meaning and purpose. Ash, once unwanted and alone, had not only found a home with her, but had also become a bridge connecting her to a wider world of art, compassion, and new beginnings. And as they eventually returned to the gallery, where Thomas was announcing the sale of nearly every painting in the exhibition, Rowena knew with certainty that this was not an ending, but rather the beginning of a new chapter in their remarkable journey together. Autumn returned to Fairbrook, painting the maple trees in fiery hues of red and gold. 1 year had passed since Rowena had found a trembling, starving cat behind St. Mary's Church, a year of transformation, challenge, and unexpected joy. On this particular crisp morning, Rowena sat on her porch swing wrapped in a hand-knit shawl with Ash curled contentedly in her lap. The cottage had changed over the months. A new studio addition extended from the eastern side, filled with light and the tools of her increasingly successful artistic career. The garden had expanded too, with a special section of catmint and other feline-friendly plants that Ash loved to explore. "Hard to believe how much has happened in just 1 year," she murmured, stroking Ash's soft fur. He had filled out completely now, his coat glossy and thick, his amber eyes bright with health and security. No one looking at him would ever guess the desperate circumstances of his earlier life. The same might be said for Rowena herself. At 69, she had more energy and purpose than she'd felt in decades. The Burlington exhibition had led to other opportunities. The State Museum show, commissions for pet portraits, even a small book deal for an illustrated version of Ash's story aimed at teaching children about compassion and second chances. But perhaps the most meaningful change was right here in Fairbrook itself. The town that had once shunned the von thief cat had embraced both Ash and his story, finding in it a mirror for their own capacity for growth and transformation. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted Rowena's reflections. Martha stepped out, waving a copy of the local newspaper. "Have you seen this?" she called, hurrying up the path with surprising agility for a woman in her 70s. "Front page!" Rowena took the paper, Ash shifting in her lap to investigate the rustling sound. The headline read, "Fairbrook Animal Shelter opens today." Beneath it was a photograph of a newly renovated building, once the abandoned hardware store at the edge of town, with a painted sign featuring a silhouette that looked remarkably like Ash. "They did it," Rowena breathed, scanning the article. "The town council actually approved the funding." "Not just approved it, they're naming it after your furry friend here," Martha said, scratching Ash under the chin. "The Ash Memorial Animal Shelter, first of its kind in the county." Rowena's eyes filled with tears as she read further. The shelter would provide temporary housing for stray animals, veterinary care, and an adoption program. A portion of the proceeds from her illustrated book would help fund ongoing operations. And most remarkably, Gladys Turner, once Ash's most vocal critic, was listed as the volunteer coordinator. "We should get ready," Martha said, checking her watch. "The ribbon-cutting ceremony starts at 11. An hour later, Rowena stood before a small crowd gathered outside the new shelter, Ash secure in his special harness beside her. The autumn sunlight glinted off his amber eyes as he surveyed the scene with dignified interest. Walter Simmons, as mayor of Fairbrook, spoke first. "Sometimes the greatest changes come from unexpected places," he said, nodding toward Ash. This little fellow reminded us what community really means, looking out for each other, offering second chances, seeing the potential in every living being. Next came Dr. Sarah Chen, who would be providing veterinary services for the shelter. "In my profession, we often see animals at their most vulnerable," she said. "What makes the difference is whether someone is willing to step forward and help. Rowena did that for Ash. Now this shelter will do that for countless other animals in need." When it was Rowena's turn to speak, she felt a momentary flutter of nerves. Public speaking had never been her forte, but she looked down at Ash, so calm and confident beside her, and found her voice. "A year ago I found a starving cat behind St. Mary's Church," she began. "He was afraid, alone, rejected by a town that saw him only as a nuisance. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just offered kindness when it was needed, a safe place to heal, a chance to become the beautiful creature he was always meant to be." She paused, emotion making her voice waver slightly. What I never expected was how much Ash would give me in return. He saved my life, literally during my heart attack, but in so many other ways too. He gave me purpose, companionship, and a reason to engage with the world again. She smiled at the assembled crowd. And he showed all of us that transformation is always possible, that it's never too late for a new beginning. As the applause faded and Mayor Simmons prepared to cut the ribbon, Rowena felt a tug on the harness. Ash was pulling insistently toward a small figure standing at the edge of the crowd, a girl of about 10, partially hidden behind her mother's skirt. With a curious glance at Martha, who shrugged in equal confusion, Rowena allowed Ash to lead her to the child. "Hello," Rowena said gently. "Do you want to meet Ash?" The girl nodded shyly, stepping forward. She had a long scar running from her temple to her chin, partially obscured by carefully arranged hair. "I read about him in the newspaper," she whispered. "Is it true he was scared of people before?" "Yes," Rowena confirmed, watching as Ash sat down directly in front of the child, his posture relaxed and welcoming. He had been hurt and frightened, so he didn't trust anyone. But he learned that not all people are the same. The girl knelt down, her movements hesitant. "I'm scared of people sometimes too," she admitted, barely audible. "Since my accident." Rowena's heart ached with sudden understanding. She crouched beside the girl, giving Ash enough slack in the harness to approach her if he chose. "Ash would understand that feeling," she said softly. "First, it takes time to feel safe again." To Rowena's amazement, Ash stepped forward and gently butted his head against the girl's hand, his way of asking for attention, a gesture he usually reserved for Rowena herself and occasionally Martha. The girl's face transformed as she carefully stroked his fur. "He's so soft," she marveled. "And he's not afraid of—" She gestured vaguely toward her scar. "Ash sees with his heart, not just his eyes," Rowena said. "He knows a friend when he meets one." The girl's mother, watching the interaction with tears in her eyes, mouthed a silent "thank you" to Rowena over her daughter's head. As they rejoined the ceremony, Rowena felt a profound sense of completion, as if the circle that had begun with a single act of kindness behind a church had widened to encompass not just her and Ash, but an entire community and beyond. Mayor Simmons handed her the ceremonial scissors. With Ash sitting regally beside her, she cut the ribbon to officially open the shelter, her heart overflowing with gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. Later that evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, Rowena and Ash sat together on the porch swing. The cottage was quiet after a day of celebration, the only sounds the gentle creaking of the swing and Ash's contented purr. "You know," Rowena said, stroking his soft fur, "I thought I was rescuing you that day. I never imagined you were actually rescuing me." Ash blinked up at her with those wise amber eyes, then settled more comfortably in her lap. In the distance, the lights of the new shelter glowed warmly against the gathering dusk, a beacon of hope and second chances. Rowena smiled, remembering the frightened, rejected cat who had once hidden in a wet cardboard box, and the lonely woman she had been before finding him. Both transformed, both healed, both discovering that sometimes the greatest gift is simply the chance to become what you were always meant to be. "And that," she whispered to her sleeping companion, "is the most unbelievable thing of all. The end."